Hello, welcome back to Fast Pass, a history podcast in close to 30 minutes or less. As always, I'm Trevor.
I am Jason.
And I'm Megan.
And today we're covering some World War II and Cold War plans, but we're doing something a little different. Instead of doing a deep dive into a single topic, I feel like covering a lot of smaller topics that could be a podcast on their own. And I'm going to try and order this from most reasonable to least reasonable, just to show just how far we'll go when it comes to winning a war.
During the Cold War, there was a constant risk of nuclear war between the US and USSR. This is what led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which very simply was the US and the USSR having nukes in foreign nations close to their enemies in case they needed to strike them quickly. The two countries came to the agreement that the USSR would remove their nukes from Cuba and the US would remove theirs from Turkey, which helped ease tensions. The US still wanted to have nukes closer to the USSR, which is why they came up with Project Iceworm.
The premise of the project was that northern Greenland was close to the USSR, but far enough away from major population centers that it would be covert and safe in case any issues might occur. From a research base called Camp Sentry, a large tunnel would be drilled into the ice shelf roughly 28 feet below the ice and would store around 600 nukes that could strike the USSR within 20 minutes of the order being given. The depth both allowed for the base to evade most enemy detection, but the ice was so thick that it could withstand any missile strikes except a, quote, massive blanket Soviet thermonuclear attack, end quote. This base would be at least 2,400 miles long, large enough to hold soldiers to maintain it and, if necessary, fire the nukes, and the goal was to make it basically a city under the ice.
Well, this seemed like a solid plan. There were several flaws with the idea. First was simply that the US had made these plans for large-scale construction within Greenland without ever asking Denmark, and they weren't even sure if Denmark would actually agree if they asked. The other major issue is that ice sheets shift, and as weather changes, such as from global warming, may melt or break off parts of the ice, meaning that the tunnels would receive damages that would be difficult to maintain over a long period of time. These led to the plan eventually being scrapped in 1962 and Camp Sentry being abandoned, now covered in roughly 100 feet of snow. Also, when abandoning the camp, they left up to 52,000 gallons of diesel and nuclear waste, which has since caused major problems because, once again, the ice melting and breaking has led to the waste spreading far and wide. And that is the end of Project Iceworm.
Our next tale starts with the CIA constantly attempting to spy on the USSR to gain information into their plans and weaknesses. They tried a number of animal spies, but noticed that there was a number of cats that were allowed to freely walk in and around the Soviet embassy. So they theorized that they could use cats as spies to see what information they could get from the embassy. This is where they developed Operation Acoustic Kitty. The goal was to install a microphone, transmitter, and antenna into a cat and then train it to walk into the embassy, gain information, and then return to a CIA agent. Over the next 5 years, they worked to improve technology so it would be small enough to fit the cat and have a battery that would last long enough to get enough info. This cost roughly $20 million. And there was a single spy kitty before the program was shut down.
Now, there were even more issues with this plan. There is obviously the ethical concerns about performing surgeries onto these cats, which definitely put them through pain, as this was a complicated process that affected a large part of the cat. Also, how do you train a cat? Unlike dogs, cats are far tougher to train, especially with specific and accurate commands. So the CIA had to basically pray that the cat actually went into the embassy to record something notable. The electronics can also be damaged since things like the microphone was hidden in the cat's ear and cats tend to, scratch their face, and that would damage the electronics. That means $20 million more and another painful surgery for another cat. The final issue, and what finally ended Project Acoustic Kitty, was that the road out in front of the embassy was very busy and the first test ended early when the cat was hit by a taxi.
So, on to our next one. During World War II, the US only had what were called stupid bombs, or essentially unguided bombs, which had their own issues. To make an unguided bomb hit a specific target, there were two options. You either have the planes fly low enough to get close to their target, but that would make them more likely to get shot down. The other option is just drop more bombs, and eventually one of them would hit. This was more expensive and also had a high chance of hitting civilians due to the sheer number of bombs having to be dropped over a larger area. So the US had to develop a smarter, more accurate bomb to save money and also lives, and this is where Project Pigeon was created.
Project Pigeon was made by the famous psychologist B.F. Skinner, who planned to guide the missiles using a pigeon pecking at a screen. He would train the pigeons to tap on a screen whenever they saw a bridge or a building, and they would receive food. 3 pigeons would be put into a cone on the front of the missile, and they would be suspended in harnesses. They would then tap the screen to help guide the missile. The initial tests were successful, and all the research and development was for under $25,000. Although this was made quickly and affordably, the government decided to not go ahead with the plan. Instead, the government used what they called bat bombs. No, these didn't use bats for these bombs, but instead a style of radio-based echolocation, which were almost as accurate as the pigeon bombs, but didn't require training and losing 3 pigeons per bomb.
This idea basically only had one issue, and it was a pretty massive one, which is the pigeons. First of all, there's the morality of sacrificing 3 pigeons every time you need to launch a precision missile, which in war is pretty often. And also, the other issue is the time it would take to train that many pigeons, because so many pigeons are being killed. Anyway, that was the end of Project Pigeon.
So on to our next one. Following the Korean War, there was tension between North and South Korea. There's this area known as the Demilitarized Zone. It's 160 miles long, about 2.5 miles wide, where there is no military presence allowed. In the DMZ, there is a joint security area, which is the only location where North and South Korea directly face each other. On August 18th of 1976, some South Korean and US soldiers had gone to chop down a tree that was stopping line of sight between the two countries. North Koreans then attacked these soldiers, killing 2. Apparently orders were given to not touch the tree, but were disregarded, which, I mean, it's fair to be annoyed at that, but I don't feel like it's good enough reason to kill the soldiers. Anyway, this caused the US to move to DEFCON 3, which means increased readiness, and have the Air Force ready to deploy within 15 minutes. And then they come up with Operation Paul Bunyan. On August 21st, some US engineers came to cut down the tree, backed up by B-52 bombers, fighter jets, and other military aircrafts. There's even the USS Midway aircraft that moved into the Korean Strait in case things got dire. Now, luckily, nothing major came from this military action, but the US really risked going to war again with North Korea over a tree. This was Operation Paul Bunyan, which was one of the only plans that actually came to fruition in this episode.
Yeah, the US wasn't the only country coming up with crazy ideas during the war. The UK feared a potential Soviet land invasion and wanted to protect themselves. This caused the development of Operation Blue Peacock, a nuclear landmine. The plan was to bury a number of nuclear landmines that could be remotely detonated when it would do the most damage. The issue comes with the fact that as you approach Russia, it gets colder, and that can cause issues with the electronics on the landmine. The solution to this issue was to put a chicken on top of the landmine when it's buried with some food so that it wouldn't peck at the wires. A few prototypes were made before they just scrapped the project. They apparently hadn't considered the amount of radioactive fallout and how it would affect the surrounding friendly countries.
So these are just some of the many weird ideas that people have during World War II and the Cold War. And the rest is history. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know, because there are so many other weird ideas for us to cover. Links to all the sources will be in the description. And, yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.